Hello everyone, Guy Sela from Cropea here. Welcome to our fertilization and irrigation online course. I'm very excited to present to you this course. Let me give you a few words about myself. This is me. I'm an agronomist in my profession. My expertise is plant nutrition and water, irrigation and water treatment. I hold a BSc in water and soil sciences from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I live in Hod HaSharon in Israel. Hod HaSharon is a small agricultural town, or was an agricultural town anyway. And in the past 10 years, I established several ag startups. Some of them are very successful. And well, today I give you this course. So let's begin. This course consists of 10 topics, or 9 topics and 1 exercise. Today we'll discuss plant nutrients. Next week, we'll talk about the soil as a source of nutrients, then water quality, and soil and water salinity. And we'll also learn how to interpret soil test results, also tissue and water test results, of course. We'll learn how to design fertilization programs and also application methods. We'll talk about fertigation, and we'll talk about the water in the soil and on irrigation management. And then I will give you an exercise. You'll have 2 or 3 weeks to do this exercise, to solve the exercise. And after you'll send it over to me, I will do an online session in which we will go over the exercise together. Okay, so let's start with the first topic, plant nutrients. Plants require 16 elements for proper growth to complete their life cycle. Now, these elements are considered essential nutrients. Plants can also absorb elements that are not considered essential nutrients. That means that they are not required for proper growth. And some of them might even be harmful, like sodium. Okay. So these are the elements, the essential elements, essential nutrients: carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, iron, manganese, zinc, copper, boron, molybdenum, and chlorine. Now, carbon is obtained from air, right? CO2, carbon dioxide. Oxygen from air and from water, H2O. From air, it's also carbon dioxide in the photosynthesis reaction. Carbon dioxide and water produce glucose and oxygen. Then we have hydrogen from water, H2O, also the H. And the rest are absorbed by the root system of the plant from the soil solution. Now, nitrogen for some crops can absorb nitrogen from, or atmospheric nitrogen. This is called fixation. They don't absorb it directly from air. There are some bacteria, which is they are symbiotic bacteria that live on nodules on the roots, and these bacteria can fix atmospheric nitrogen. It can reach considerable amounts of nitrogen. Fixation can reach even up to 500 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Okay, that's a lot. And this group of crops that can do that are the legumes. All right, over here we see the nodules on the roots. Anyways, nutrients affect the crop yield, right? So in order to understand that, let's see what's the potential yield of the crop. The potential yield of a crop is basically the maximum yield that can be achieved in the absence of limiting factors. So what are limiting factors? We have some factors that cannot be modified or can be slightly modified, like the genetics, which means the variety of the crop. The variety of the crop determines the potential yield. Okay, so different varieties, different genetics have different potential yields. The climate also affects the potential, the yield, not the potential yield, sorry, right? Soil type affect the yield. Water quality affects the yield. Nutrients, and the nutrients that that are in the soil or water, or the nutrients that we provide with fertilizers. So this can be a limiting factor. Water can be a limiting factor. Planting density, cultural practices, pests and diseases. These are all factors that can limit the yield. So we have the potential yield, and we have all the limiting factors, right? Where the potential yield is basically determined by the genetics. Okay, this is the potential yield. Now, where we plant the crop, on which soil, in which location, in which climate, how we manage the crop, fertilization, irrigation, pests, diseases, cultural practices, all these affect the actual yield, not the potential yield. This is how yield, or the crop yield, responds to nutrient application. What we see over here on the y-axis is the relative yield, percent of the potential yield, and the nutrient application rate, okay, or the availability of nutrients. So in this zone, we have nutrient deficiency, or the nutrients that are supplied or are available for the crop are actually limiting the yield. So at this nutrient level, for instance, right, the crop cannot reach its potential yield. As much as we provide more nutrients, okay, yield increases up to a certain point. From this point onwards, any addition of nutrients will not increase the yield, as we can see over here, the plateau, right? And then we have the salinity or toxicity threshold. That means that excess of nutrients or elements, okay, will result in yield reduction, okay, due to specific toxicities of certain elements, or salinity, which means that if we do not consider the cost of the nutrients, it means we don't use or when there is no economical consideration, this is the optimal nutrient level that brings us to the maximum potential yield. And that's only if there are no other limiting factors. Of course, that we may apply the optimal nutrient rates, nutrient levels, but we have other limiting factors. Then even with the optimal nutrient level, we will not reach the potential yield. All right. And this is explained by Liebig's law of minimum, which states that the least available resource is the one that limits the production, the yield, even if other resources are at the optimal level. Of course, that the same is true for resources that are in excess, that they can also reduce, like we saw, they might also reduce the yields. So if we assume, for example, that the water in this barrel represents the yield, we can see that in this specific example, iron, all right, limits the yield. We have other nutrients that some of them are in their optimal supply, optimal availability, but iron is in deficiency. The yield will be limited by the iron. In this case, iron is the least available resource, right? And we can see it also here. And here we compare two nutrients, nutrient A, nutrient B. This is the level over here of nutrient A. All right, so we can see that nutrient A is at its optimal level. Okay, it doesn't limit the yield. However, nutrient B, this level of nutrient B, all right, nutrient B is in a level that actually limits the yield. So in this case, the supply of nutrient B limits the yield, although the supply of nutrient A is optimal. So that's why fertilizer management might be complicated, because we have to balance all plant nutrients. All right. Now, what are the nutrient requirements of the crop? The nutrient requirements of a crop are the amounts or rates of nutrients that the crop requires for its growth. This is the actual rates in pounds per acre, kilograms per hectare, etc. Now, the nutrient requirements include all the available nutrient sources. Okay? It means in soil, water, and fertilizer application. In other words, it's not, the nutrient requirements are not necessarily the nutrient rates that we want to apply, or that we apply with the fertilizers. Okay, it's the requirement. They refer to the requirement of the crop. And some nutrients may be available already available in the soil, maybe applied with water, etc. So over here in this table, we can see an example of nutrient requirements of potato according to different authors. Now we see that there are some differences, and we can also see that nutrient requirements are always related to a specific target yield. What does this mean? Let's see an example. According to Burton in 1989, okay, a potato for a yield of 100 tons per hectare require between 250 to 450, okay, quite a large range of nitrogen, 35 to 65 phosphorus, 350 to 550 of potassium, etc. Let's compare it to other authors. Evans found in 1977 that for a yield of 77 tons per hectare, the potato crop requires 250 kilograms per hectare of nitrogen, 80 kilograms per hectare of phosphorus as P2O5, and 325 kilograms per hectare of potassium as K2O. Okay, so we see there are differences between the others. What we can do, or what we should do with this, is build a nutrient uptake curve, or yield response curve. Now, as I mentioned, the nutrient requirements depend on the crop genetics, and the target yield. They do not depend on geography, climate conditions, say soil, water, etc. In these research results, in this table, we don't see the location, we don't see the climate conditions, we just see a correlation between the nutrient demand or nutrient uptake and the yield. Now, I noticed a lot of confusion the growers have between uptake and removal, all right? Nutrient uptake versus nutrient removal. So let's see what's the difference here. Nutrient uptake refers to the total amount of nutrients absorbed by the crop, while nutrient removal is the amount of nutrients in the harvested organs, in the grain, the fruit, the forage, etc. This means that the nutrient removal will always be less than the nutrient uptake. Now, when we when we give fertilizer recommendations, for instance, okay, if we use the nutrient removal rates, we might apply rates too low, rates of nutrient rates that are too low. Okay, unless we tested the soil and the soil test results indicate that the nutrients in the soil are all in the adequate level. We'll discuss this later on in this course. But here we can see some examples of nutrient uptake versus removal, in this case in kilograms per hectare per ton of yield. So tomato, in general, these are general figures, right? And the uptake is 2.8, but in the fruit, okay, we have 1.3 kilograms per hectare per ton. Phosphorus, the uptake is 1.3, and the removal is 0.46. Potassium is K2O, 3.8 is the uptake, 2.9 is the removal. So the removal is always less than or equal to the uptake. Okay, equal if the harvested organ is the entire plant, okay, or almost the entire plant. So we saw how nutrients or nutrient application affect the yield, but it's not only the total amount of the nutrients that we apply, it's also the timing when we apply the nutrients. And this is described in the nutrient uptake curves, okay? In these curves, we can see the uptake rate in different growth stages or in throughout time. Okay, what do we see here? For instance, this is just general, just an example, right? And we have nitrogen is the green one, and potassium, the orange, and phosphorus, the blue one over here. Okay, so we see that the rate of uptake varies along the growing season. And this has an implication over the way that we apply the nutrients or the timing in which we apply the nutrients. Over here we can see examples, real examples, okay, of a potato versus a corn. Okay, we see that the trend is even a bit different. In potato, we apply, let's say at day 80 after planting or seeding, all right, after transplanting, the potassium rate is higher than the nitrogen rate, while in corn, it's the opposite. Okay, so the point here that each crop has a specific nutrient uptake curve, right? And we have to match the fertility program to this curve. So it's not only the total amount of nutrients, it's also when we apply the nutrients, because we want to avoid losses of nutrients like leaching of nitrogen, for instance, which we discuss, okay, etc. All right. We want to apply the nutrients when the crop actually needs them. So we have to know this information. Now, plant nutrients can be classified according to the quantity required by plants. I assume that most of you already know that, but let's go over it. Macronutrients are nutrients that plants require in greater quantities, and these are the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, N, P, and K. Right? Secondary nutrients are nutrients that plants require in smaller amounts than macronutrients, but still in relatively high amounts, and these are calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. And micronutrients are nutrients that plants require in small amounts. These are boron, chlorides, iron, manganese, zinc, copper, and molybdenum. In this table over here, we can see the typical daily uptake of crops. This is super general, very, very general. These are not fertilizer recommendations or nutrient recommendations, all right? These are the typical uptake rates, just to also to compare the quantities. So for instance, if nitrogen is required by most crops, we have a requirement of between 1.5 to 4 kilograms per hectare, okay, 1.3 to 3.5 pounds per acre, all right? We can compare it to iron, which the typical daily uptake is between 20 to 50 grams per hectare. Okay, so you can see the difference between micronutrients, macronutrients, and secondary nutrients. All right, so this gives you an idea about the uptake rates of different nutrients. Another classification is according to the mobility in the plant. The mobility of the nutrient within the plant refers to its mobility from mature tissue to new growth. So mobile nutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, chlorides, and molybdenum. And immobile nutrients are calcium, sulfur, boron, iron, copper, manganese, and zinc, which means that nitrogen can move from mature tissue to the new growth, towards the new growth, same as phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and others like calcium, sulfur, boron on this side of the table cannot. Now, this helps us, knowing that helps us to identify nutrient deficiencies or toxicities, because the site of visual symptoms depends on the mobility of the nutrients. Symptoms of deficiency of mobile nutrients will appear in older leaves, while symptoms of immobile nutrients will appear on younger leaves. Now that's because that if for instance, we have iron, there is an iron deficiency, okay, iron is immobile, that means that it does not readily move from the older tissue to the new growth. When there is a deficiency, Okay, it will first appear on the new growth because the plant cannot translocate iron to the new growth, right? Now, about the absorption of nutrients, since plant nutrients are basically soluble salts, soluble minerals. They are always absorbed in their ionic form, which means that most nutrients carry an electrical charge. Okay, this is the way that salts dissolve to cations and anions. I will explain that. Absorption of nutrients is always from the soil solution, or in case of hydroponics, from the nutrient solution. All right, plants cannot absorb nutrients directly from soil particles. Okay? It requires an aqueous medium, water. That means that only minerals or nutrients that are dissolved in the soil solution can be absorbed by the plants. Of course, there is an equilibrium between the solid phase of the soil and the soil solution, which means that once the plant absorbs nutrients from the soil solution, some nutrients are released from the solid phase of the soil, from the soil particles, into the soil solution. But the plant only absorb nutrients from the soil solution. All right. So in what forms plants absorb the nutrients? Let's see. You can see that here in this table. Nitrogen is absorbed either as nitrate, NO3, which carries a negative charge. Okay, it's an ion, or as ammonium, NH4 plus, which is carries a positive charge. And this is of great importance. We see that phosphorus is absorbed either as H2PO4, HPO4, or PO4. Potassium is K plus, calcium is a calcium, 2 plus, magnesium is Mg, 2 plus, sulfur, magnesium, as SO4, sulfate, iron as ferrous iron and ferric iron, manganese, a charge of 2, zinc, copper, as you see here in this table. Molybdenum is a molybdate, boron as a borate, and chlorine as chloride ion. Now, as we saw, the nutrients can be classified by their electrical charge. So we have cations, which are ions that carry a positive charge, and anions, which are ions that carry a negative charge. So cations, we have these, okay, the ammonium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, iron, manganese, zinc, and copper. And ions, we have the nitrate, which is major form of a nitrogen. We have the phosphorus forms, sulfates, molybdate, boron forms, and chlorides. It's very interesting to see that nitrogen is unique, as it can be absorbed either as cation or an ion. So let's review the functions of some of the nutrients in plants and some of the reactions in the soil, a little bit about that as well, about the cycle of some of the nutrients. So nitrogen is a major nutrient. Okay, it's a macronutrient. It's very important. It has important roles in the formation of a chlorophyll. It's a constituent of the chlorophyll molecule. The chlorophyll molecule is the molecule that absorbs light in photosynthesis. It also gives the plant the leaves, their green color. Okay, so nitrogen is a part, as you can see here, the N, not the magnesium here, is a part, the constituent of the chlorophyll molecule. It's also a constituent of the nucleic acids, the DNA and RNA, and is a constituent of proteins, okay, in the amino acids. Okay, and the DNA and RNA, it's part of the nitrogenous bases, the adenine, guanine, the uracil, cytosine, thymine. They all have nitrogen in their molecule structure. So nitrogen affects crop yield as well as the protein content. Over here you have the nitrogen cycle. Okay, in the soil, okay, we have nitrification process that basically converts ammonium to nitrates and then nitrates. Nitrates are not absorbed by plants. Organic matter in the soil is mineralized also to these forms. Ammonium, this is, by the way, from ammonium to nitrates. It's also a process that is done by bacteria. Okay, and as we mentioned, ammonium and nitrates are absorbed by plants. There is also a process of denitrification where mineral nitrogen, okay, converts to atmospheric nitrogen, and we have fixation by lightning that breaks the nitrogen molecules, the atmospheric nitrogen molecules, to the NOx form, NOx, right, which are then dissolved in rain and water, and then go through also mineralization. Okay, fertilizers are a source of nitrogen as well, and nitrogen, especially in the nitrate form, is susceptible for leaching. It readily leaches from the soil in the nitrate form because it carries a negative charge, and the soil particles also carry a negative charge. So there are some repulsion forces, and the nitrogen leaches as nitrate leaches from soil. All right. Deficiency and excess of nitrogen. Deficiency symptoms include chlorosis, which means pale green leaves. It results in poor growth. The symptoms start on older leaves. We mentioned it's a mobile nutrient. In a more advanced deficiency, the leaves turn yellow and fall off. Excess of nitrogen might cause delayed maturity and delayed harvest. The plants might become weak. The quality will be reduced. The crop will be of lower quality. It will be susceptible to attacks by pests and diseases. Excess of nitrogen will also result many times in losses of nitrogen by leaching and by volatilization. And of course, excess might result in competition with other nutrients. So excess of nitrogen might cause deficiency of other nutrients, for instance, sulfur. Now, I mentioned before that the form of nitrogen that is absorbed by plants is of a great importance, and I would like to explain that. And this is due to the way nitrogen is metabolized within the plant. So basically, ammonium metabolism, the NH4, right, takes place in the roots, while the metabolism of nitrate takes place in the leaves. Now, in the roots, ammonium reacts instantly with sugars. Okay, it cannot remain as ammonium because free ammonium immediately converts to ammonia, and ammonia is very toxic to the cells of the roots. It kills the cells within milliseconds. So ammonium must react immediately with sugars. But what happens? At high root temperatures, that means at high temperatures, the respiration rate of cells increases, okay? Now, respiration consumes large amounts of sugars. Sugars are produced in the leaves and have to be transported to the roots. So what happens at higher respiration rates, which means at higher temperatures, we have higher respiration rate, which results in less available sugars that can be transported to the roots. Okay, and then application of ammonium at high temperatures might result in a lack of available sugars to react with the ammonium in the roots. And this might cause toxicity. It means that at high temperatures, we will prefer to use more nitrate sources, okay, less ammonium, right? Because of the way these two forms of nitrogen are being metabolized within the plant. And there is another effect that I will mention I think in the next class. And this is the effect over the pH of the soil or pH around the roots. It's difficult to affect the pH of the soil itself, but basically when plants absorb ammonium, they release hydrogen ions. Hydrogen ions lower the pH around the roots. Okay, this is like acid, right? And therefore, application of ammonium, right, reduces the pH around the roots, while application of nitrate increases the pH around the roots. Right? This is very important in soilless culture and hydroponics. The soil has a more buffer capacity; it can resist changes, but still around the roots there are changes. Okay, phosphorus. Phosphorus improves root growth. It improves flower formation. It improves fruit maturity, and it increases the resistance of the crop to environmental stress. Deficiency symptoms include stunted growth, dark purplish color of the older leaves, inhibited flowering, delaying flowering, inhibited growth of the root system. Phosphorus is a component of certain enzymes and proteins. It's also a component of the ATP, the adenosine triphosphate, which is a molecule that is responsible for storing and transferring energy in plant cells. It's a very important molecule, and phosphorus is a very important constituent of this molecule, of the ATP. It's also a constituent of DNA and RNA, right? Plants absorb phosphorus from soil solution mainly as HPO4 or H2PO4. The proportion in which these two forms are present in the soil solution depends on the pH of the soil solution. All right, so the pH of the soil solution affects the pH of the soil, affects the form in which phosphorus is available in the soil. So in pH of 6, we have more H2PO4. In pH of 8, we have more HPO4. All right. We can see here the phosphorus cycle. So also here we have plant residues, animal feces, biosolids that go through decomposition by bacteria and fungi to organic phosphorus. The organic phosphorus goes over mineralization process by bacteria to the soluble forms that the plants can absorb. Fertilizers are also source of mineral phosphorus, mineral fertilizers. Phosphorus that is absorbed to mineral surfaces goes through processes of desorption and absorption. Mineral phosphorus in the soil, part of the minerals that goes through weathering and dissolution to the soluble phosphorus forms. Okay, and of course, processes of immobilization of phosphorus from the immobilization from the soluble forms to the organic form. Right, depends on bacteria in the soil and conditions in the soil. A major problem of phosphorus might be erosion and runoff. Okay, phosphorus does not readily move in the soil, and therefore it tends to remain in the upper layer of the soil when we apply phosphorus with fertilizers. Okay, and then it is susceptible to erosion and runoff, losses by erosion and runoff. Potassium, another macronutrient. Potassium regulates the opening and closing of the stomata. It participates also in the synthesis of the ATP. It regulates the water absorption. It activates many enzymes. It's necessary for protein metabolism. It strengthens cell walls, and as a result, it also increases the resistance to diseases. The deficiency symptoms of potassium include chlorosis or necrosis along the edges of older leaves. It's quite not so complicated to identify potassium deficiencies. You see the older leaves, you'll see a necrosis and chlorosis along the edges of the leaves. Okay, while the inner part of the leaf remains green. Now, these symptoms are common to many crops. All right, that's why it's a bit easier to identify potassium deficiency. Eventually, the edges of the leaves turn brown and die, necrosis. Leaves will be smaller, the yield will be poorer. Potassium deficiency will decrease the quality of the crop, the size, uniformity, sugar content, protein content, etc. The shelf life will be usually shorter, okay, and the crop may be more susceptible to diseases. Magnesium, one of the most well-known functions of magnesium is in the photosynthesis process. It is a constituent of the chlorophyll molecule. Okay, over here, see, this is the chlorophyll. Deficiency symptoms include yellowing between the veins and of leaf edges. The deficiency starts on the old leaves first. We may see reddish or brownish spots on the leaves. It may form a green, what we see here, see a green triangle, okay, at the base of the leaves. And the young leaves can be also affected as the deficiency progresses. Availability of magnesium decreases in low pH. When the pH of the soil is lower than 6, we might start seeing some magnesium deficiencies. Excess of potassium and calcium can also result in magnesium deficiency. I didn't explain the reason for that. This is called antagonism, all right? Magnesium, potassium, and calcium all have what in common? They have a positive charge, all right? And since they have a positive charge, if we have excess of one of them, it will affect the uptake of another nutrient that is more or less similar in the charge, all right, and in size. So excess of magnesium will might result in calcium deficiency, for instance. And calcium strengthens cell walls, and it's doing that by forming compounds of calcium pectate. It helps protect the plant from diseases. Numerous fungi and bacteria secrete enzymes that damage the plant, the cell wall, and obviously stronger cell walls, which are induced by calcium, can prevent the invasion of the bacteria and fungi. It's also known as a regulator of cell growth and elongation of cells, and it participates in enzymatic and hormonal processes. Deficiency symptoms, okay, include smaller young leaves, smaller and deformed young leaves. All right, it's what we see over here. You see the deformations, okay, and necrotic tissue on young leaves, poor growth, tip burn. Okay, so we can see that here. Sorry, all right. Stunted roots and damage to fruit, like blossom end rot in tomato. We see over here, and tomato and pepper, bitter pits in apples, and etc. Now, calcium deficiency can also be a result of water stress. And why? Calcium is transported within the plant with transpiration, with the water in the plant. And when there is water stress, calcium cannot be transported well to plant cells. Okay, and this might result in calcium deficiency. That means that the calcium may be available in the soil, all right, or we may even apply a calcium fertilizer, and yet, if there is water stress, calcium will not be properly absorbed by the plant. So this is very important to remember. It's something also that is quite common. All right. Also, calcium deficiency is hard to correct because the timing of the deficiency is very important. If we have calcium deficiency during flowering, even a temporary deficiency, this might already affect the yield and the fruit of the crop. All right. Now, if we add calcium after or too late, it will not fix the deficiency and will have the damage. The reason is that it is needed when the cells are being formed. All right. So once the cell is formed with deficiency of calcium, any addition of calcium will not help. Iron. Iron is necessary for biosynthesis of the chlorophyll molecule. It serves as an electron carrier in the respiration and photosynthesis processes, and it participates in many enzymatic processes as well. Deficiency symptoms are also relatively easy to identify, and they include chlorosis and yellowing of younger leaves, and the veins remain green. Iron is available at a lower soil pH, and it is not available in alkaline soils. Boron promotes a proper cell division. It's essential for cell division. It also strengthens cell walls. It helps in pollination and also in seed formation and sugar translocation. And it's important for plants' hormonal system. Boron is readily available in pH lower than 5.5, but also might also reach toxic levels. So the range between deficiency and toxicity in case of boron is very narrow, and this is a bit tricky, okay, because addition of a small amount of boron might result in a toxicity, while deficiency might also become a problem if the level is too low. Sometimes the difference is, if we talk about, let's say, concentration in water, so a concentration of 0.1 parts per million can be too low, and a concentration of 1 part per million might be too high for some crops, right? Deficiency symptoms include deformations, leaf curls inward, stunted growth, and abortion of flowers. Stems will usually be thicker and leaves become brittle. Okay. Toxicity symptoms include necrosis and marginal chlorosis. They usually start with yellowish leaf tips and continue with progressive necrosis. Obviously, leaf analysis is essential to identify such toxicities and deficiencies. All right, so I will not go over all the nutrients. I just wanted to give you a sense of the functions of some nutrients and the deficiency and toxicity symptoms of some nutrients. Let's talk a little bit about units and conversions. Nutrient requirements are commonly expressed in the following forms. Okay. Nitrogen, usually expressed as N. I will explain that. Potassium as K2O when we talk about recommendations for soil or nutrient requirements for plants, for crops in soil. Phosphorus as P2O5, calcium as calcium oxide, magnesium as magnesium oxide, sulfur usually as elemental sulfur, sometimes as a sulfate as well, boron as boron B, so all the micronutrients, in their elemental forms. Okay, I refer here to when you open the literature, you open a book, or not today, it's not a book, you Google something, and you have you find the nutrient requirements of the crop. In most of the cases, the forms, the nutrient forms, will be expressed in the forms that I indicated here. All right. Now, the oxide forms actually do not exist in nature. All right, and these are not the forms in which the plants absorb these nutrients. We already reviewed the forms in which plants absorb nutrients. Now, the reason for that is the historical reason. So this is the way that the nutrients are expressed also in fertilizers. All right, when we say the NPK of a fertilizer, we usually mean the N, K2O, P2N, P2O5, K2O. All right, we'll see an example in a second. So, and this is very important, when we indicate the nutrient requirements of a crop, in order to avoid errors, the nutrient form must be indicated as well. And this is especially true for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, where most errors and misunderstandings occur. For example, if the crop requires 30 pounds per acre of phosphorus as P2O5, all right, we don't say, all right, the phosphorus requirement is, or the requirement of phosphorus is 30 pounds per acre. We should say the requirement is 30 pounds per acre of phosphorus as P2O5. So if the source of information, okay, does not indicate the form of the nutrient, then we cannot consider this information reliable, because we don't know. There is a difference. For instance, the conversion between elemental phosphorus P to P2O5 is the conversion factor is 2.29. Okay, this is a big difference. All right. In hydroponics, on the other way, all right, the nutrient requirements are usually expressed in the elemental form of the nutrients. So I prepared here a conversion tables, okay, from different forms. So to convert a K to K2O, we multiply by 1.2. To convert P to P2O5, we multiply by 2.29, etc. All right. Let's see an example. A crop requires 200 pounds per acre of potassium in its elemental form. And we want to know the requirement as a K2O. So, right, we have 200 times a 1.2, and this gives us 240 pounds per acre. Right? How we do this calculation? How did we obtain these conversion factors? I just want you to understand that. So let's see. To obtain these conversion factors, we need to use the molecular weight of the elements. For example, we would like to calculate the conversion factor from P to P2O5. All right. The molecular weight of P, of phosphorus, is 31 grams per mole. Mole is a number, okay? It's 6.022 times 10 in the power of 22, right? So 6.022 times 10 in the power of 22 molecules of P, elemental P, will weigh 31 grams. In the same way, molecular weight of oxygen is 16 grams per mole. And the molecular weight of P2O5 is therefore 31 times 2, we have 2 elemental P's, all right, plus 16 times 5, right, 5 oxygens. This gives us 142 grams per mole. So this is the molecular weight of P2O5, all right, of this form, which actually does not exist. Now, if we divide the molecular weight of this molecule by the molecular weight of a P of phosphorus, we will get the conversion factor. So just pay attention that here we have 2 P's, all right? So it's 142 of the entire molecule over 31 times 2. We have 2 molecules of P in the P2O5 molecule. So this gives us 2.29, and this is the conversion factor, all right? And this way we can convert basically any form to any other form. In soil-grown crops, the nutrient requirements and the fertilizer recommendations will usually be given in units of kilograms per hectare or pounds per acre. Some conversions here, some conversion factors. 1 acre equals a 0.404 hectares. 1 hectare equals 2.47 acres. 1 kilogram equals 2.2 pounds. 1 pound equals 0.45 kilograms. 1 pound per acre equals 1.12 kilograms per hectare. And 1 kilogram per hectare equals 0.89 pounds per acre. So just that you have this conversion factor. In soil culture, the nutrient requirements are expressed in parts per million, ppm, millimoles per liter, or milligrams per liter. And the fertilizer recommendations are usually given in grams per cubic meter or in grams per gallon. But usually then we do, when we talk about soil culture, we design a fertigation recipe, a fertilizer recipe. And then we have the rates in the tanks. I will explain that and when we talk about fertigation. So ppm stands for parts per million. This is millimoles per liter. Mmole per liter is millimoles, stands for millimoles per liter. Mg per liter stands for milligrams per liter. And this one, G, grams per cubic meter, all right? In water, 1 part per million equals 1 gram per cubic meter or 1 milligram per liter. Why is that? This is because water density is 1 kilogram per liter, which means that the weight of 1 cubic meters of water is 1 million grams. All right, so 1 part per million, 1 gram per cubic meter. All right, because million grams or 1 cubic meter is million grams. This is why we can do this conversion, right? Because when we talk about parts per million, then we have grams to cubic meters. Grams are its weight and cubic meters are its volume. The reason we can do this conversion is because the water density of water is 1. In order to convert from millimoles per liter to ppm, to parts per million, or to milligrams per liter, we have to multiply the millimoles per liter by the molecular weight. Let's see an example. Okay, we want to convert 3 millimoles per liter of calcium to parts per million. How do we do this conversion? Let's see some answers. Yeah. All right. Okay, we're getting some answers here. Some are right, some are wrong. And yeah, Patrick, you're right. But all right, let's see. So, free, what do we have to do? The molecular weight of calcium is 40 grams per mole or 40 milligrams per millimole. So 3 millimoles per liter times 40 milligrams per millimole times the molecular weight gives us 120 milligrams per liter or 120 ppms, parts per million, right? So that's all for today. Feel free to write me an email if you have any questions, or even send me a WhatsApp message. I will be happy to answer your questions. Today we had some general lesson. All right. I wanted to explain about the nutrients, their availability, and the way, the forms in which they are absorbed, some deficiency and toxicity symptoms, and the way that we express nutrient requirements, nutrient recommendations, etc. In the next session, we will discuss some reactions in the soil, availability of nutrients in the soil, and basically the soil as source of nutrients, cation exchange capacity, etc. So we'll see everyone next week, same time. I'll stay here for another 10 or 15 minutes to answer your questions. I'm sorry I didn't answer the questions during the presentation. It was a little bit difficult. We had many questions. So I'll now respond questions over the chat. All right. So stay here for a little while. If you have additional questions, you can type your questions. I will be happy to answer any question. And anyways, see you next week. Thank you very much for participating, and I hope you enjoyed. Bye-bye.